Fantastic. And as you do, take a minute to check and make sure your mics are muted. We're going to be recording this morning's, I guess for some of you, it's this afternoon's presentation. And so keeping your mic on mute helps the audio be nice and clean, so that we can hear during the presentation and for the recording. And I'm just watching a couple more people come in here and we'll move on to introductions. It's great to see you all. Glad everyone has made it through their weather so far.
Stone, you got muted.
Yeah.
There we go. In the big transition. I got excited about the muting, I guess. So yes, for folks just joining, this presentation will be recorded, and we're asking everybody except me and our speakers to keep their mics muted. I'm not sure where I cut out, but my name is Stone Cairns, and I am a life coach that focuses on working with activists and world changers. And I'm also a trainer for the Meta Peace team. And I'm super excited to introduce our first session of day 3 here. And to begin day 3, we wanted to ask the question that is the question, it seems, for folks in the Shanti Sena Network, which is, what is the one question that plagues every member of our network? And that question is, how do we attract volunteers and staff to unarmed civilian protection? How do we get people into this very strange field we've adopted? And so this morning, we've got recruiting, nurturing, and organizing for unarmed civilian protection. And we've got a great lineup of folks that are going to share their experience with us. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel today. Steve Gast is, here we go. Stephen Gastar has wonderfully agreed to facilitate this group. And we're going to lead off with Mary Hannah, who is the operations manager and internship supervisor for Meta Peace Team. And then we'll be hearing from Rivera's son, who's an activist and an author. Hi, Rivera. And also the programs coordinator for Pace Bene. And Stephen Naimiche is in our lineup. And then we will, who am I missing here?
Mel
and Mel Duncan. Ha! Who is one of our co-founders at Nonviolent Peace Force. So I'm looking forward to the presentation and welcoming us all. At the end, we're going to have time for questions and answers. You can always add your question to the chat so you don't forget it. But we'll go through those questions and answer period at the end of the presentation, once we've heard from all of our guests. So I'll turn it over.
Wonderful. So it is my honor to be able to facilitate this meeting this morning. So I am going to, so all of the speakers have agreed to limit their remarks to 10 minutes. So I will start the clock as soon as they start talking. And then it is my experience that holding up signs doesn't work very well over a Zoom format. So I'm simply going to butt into the conversation at about 8 minutes to let them know they have 2 minutes left. And if they're still talking at 10 minutes, I'll butt in and say that time's up. So, so with that, let's start with Mary Hannah, and she can start off our dialogue for this morning.
Well, good morning or afternoon, I guess, to everybody, and thank you so much for being here. I am going to offer some more general tips than my fellow panelists, because they have some great specialty niche things that they can share. Mine are just a little bit more general that I hope are going to be helpful. most of these things are probably already on your radar. Um, but as you know, that saying, preaching to the choir needs to practice. So maybe some of these things will remind you of stuff that you know, but you may not have like had in the forefront of your attention. So it shouldn't be all that new, but I think it's worth remembering. And this is all based on having some participation in an organization that centers or has work in unarmed civilian protection. So I guess the first thing to remember is that they can't join you if they don't know you exist. So make educating the public a priority. And the public is, I think when we think public, we think in the reference point that the media tends to use, which is just the news watchers. Um, but reach out to your local faith communities and civic organizations. Almost all faiths boil down to that precept of love thy neighbor. And what could be more demonstrative of love thy neighbor than doing unarmed civilian protection? Um, let them know who you are, what you do, and offer to speak for their group or organization. Civic organizations like Rotary and local book clubs, which are often associated with bookstores, are always looking for speakers. So you could offer that to be a resource for them for that. Consistently post to social media. And what you might want to do is look for someone in your organization who really loves doing that, because there are people who love to be on Facebook and Twitter and will consistently get out the little tidbits of what you're doing that you might not think are necessarily important enough for a press release, but also will keep in the public's eye the fact that you're out there and you're doing stuff. When you are doing a big event or placing a team, doing a big training, yes, send out the press release, but make sure you can also include photos and or video of the event, depending upon the timing of the release, to make it easy for the press to cover you. They don't want to have to do any extra work. And if you've got photos or video at hand that they can use, you've just helped them do their job. Don't forget about independent media. They're more likely to pick this stuff up. And that helps a lot, but you have to start courting your local media folks, developing a relationship with them so that one or two reporters actually get to know your name or your spokesperson's name. You're harder to ignore when they've got a name attached to what you're doing. And an effective and cost-effective way of doing this is to co-sponsor like-hearted organizations' events. So that doesn't necessarily have to be a big financial cost. I mean, yes, it's helpful when other organizations can financially support a training you're trying to do, or a presentation that you'd like to offer. But bartering is great too, and we frequently do that at Meta Peace Team. That we don't have a lot of funds in our coffers for things like this, but we can make sure that we publicize your event, that we get people to know about it, and we are really appreciated when that kind of relationship is reciprocated. And then when you're able, show up for their stuff. When they know that you're not just giving them lip service, other organizations, all of this, and you know this, is based on relationship. And that will really make things work. Become more visible. So things like bumper stickers, t-shirts, lapel pins, magnets. Like a lot of people don't like putting bumper stickers on their car, but I have them magnets on my car. And they all provoke that question of what is, I'm going to use Meta Peace Team in this example because that's who I work for. But so what is Meta Peace Team when they see that bumper sticker, lapel pin, whatever, and have your elevator speech ready. For those of you unfamiliar with that terminology, the elevator speech is like if you get into an elevator and somebody sees, you know, let's say your lapel pin or your t-shirt and says, what is, you have to be ready to answer them concisely enough for them to get a good understanding of what it is and be compelled to learn more about it. So craft that elevator speech with the people who know and love the organization the best, knowing that you've only got a floor to go in that elevator. You don't get to give them a presentation. So example, if someone says to me, well, what is about a peace team? Well, we believe ordinary citizens can stop violence better than the police or the military and without reverting to violence ourselves. And we teach people how to do that. And then carry cards with you, business cards or personal cards that include your website and your email on them. So you can hand them that card or offer them that card before they get off the elevator, or you do in the metaphorical sense. But as you're doing that, please remember to introduce yourself. In the days before COVID, offer your hand. Hopefully we're going to go back to those days. And say you're happy to answer any questions if they ever want to get in touch. Be genuine. Come across as, I'd like to get to know you a bit better too, rather than, hey, I got a quota to meet, I just tagged you. So make it about building relationships. That energy, even if the words aren't there, will come across. In all of your outreach in this particular field, I think you have to emphasize that one individual person really can make a difference in this world. I think everybody wants to think that their life has made a difference. And so you have to live that belief too. Know in your heart that one person can make a difference, and share that excitement with the people you're talking to. And once you have their interest in your organization, your group, give them something to do. So a training, a webinar, a project, even helping with mailing, and then follow up afterwards with them. An example for like what we do is after a training, we actually have like a little feedback form. Is like, how can we like stay in touch with you? Do you want to be on our email list? Do you want more information about future trainings? Are you interested in our work at the US-Mexico border or in Palestine, Israel? Are you interested in doing community peace teams, neighborhood peace teams? So that they don't feel like once they've done whatever that little first event is with you, once that's over, that you're not done with them. You want them to know you want to continue to build this relationship and welcome them in.
Mary, you have about 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll speak quickly. So for newer unarmed civilian protection organizations, there's not a peace team every week. So plan other activities to keep people engaged. So we have like a partnership with the Meta Center for Nonviolence to do monthly skills practice. You could do webinars, book clubs. We had interns do dinner and a movie night, and they partnered with restaurants in the community who offered the food for free. And people came in, watched a timely movie about a topic that involved social justice, and had dinner together and talked. Join up with other organizations and partner with them to help them. I'm trying to talk really fast. I thought I had this like really short, but there's just so much passion in what we're doing. Be prepared for them to Google you. So are you ready? Do you have a website and a Facebook page? And if you're not techie, ask for help with search engine optimization, SEO, so that if someone Googles you, they can actually find you. And most importantly, always express your gratitude to people for whatever they've participated in, whether that's verbally, e-cards, plan gatherings with food if you can, because research shows that eating together creates work teams that are cohesive and dedicated to the cause, and it breaks down the barriers. Have an open door, open ear policy on everything you're doing so that it's a communal project that you're doing. Self-care is not optional, and don't just contact people when you need them. Keep them engaged and get their input on what they need to stay that way. Amen.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic, and with 12 seconds to spare. So our next presenter is Mel Duncan. So the same rules apply. You have heard Mel's introduction. He is legendary, but I look forward to hearing what you have to say, Mel, and you have 10 minutes. You are muted, so we're not hearing anything.
I got to do mine in pantomime. First of all, in the introduction, I was introduced as one of the co-founders of Nonviolent Peace Force. And with no sense of false modesty, David Hartsoe, who you will hear later on this afternoon, and I are given that title. But really, what we did was to hold the focus on a vision that has occurred and recurred for many, many years. We heard examples yesterday from Sephora, but it goes back centuries, actually. And so really what we are doing is holding a focus and inviting people to be part of something that is emerging and to really communicate that sense of reality, that this is a way that is working, is effective, and is growing and will continue to grow. And so to invite people to join and to co-create. There's a number of people on this call this morning who have helped form Nonviolent Peace Force, including a couple of people who have worked in the field for us. When we started organizing in 1999, we had a concept paper that we circulated to a lot of places around the world. And one of the ideas was that the people working as nonviolent peacekeepers or unarmed civilian protectors would be subsistence workers. And we got a lot of feedback from probably more on that point than any other one. And it went along the lines of, number one, your privilege is showing. Maybe you and David and some others can afford to leave your families for 1 or 2 years with only a subsistence stipend, but a lot of us can't. And then secondly, that people were saying, if we're going to do this work and be well-trained and put ourselves in harm's way on an ongoing basis, we should be paid at least as much as a soldier. And so that set us on a path that was very different and has its advantages and disadvantages today. But we do have a core of volunteers. We were started by volunteers who all just stepped forward and said, we're going to create this. But almost everyone, and we have about 300 unarmed civilian protectors in 6 areas of the world, including Minneapolis. And most of them are paid and also receive benefits and healthcare and things like that. So we've always gone on a sense of attraction rather than promotion. This is a big opportunity that we're asking you to join us on. And we have never had lacked for recruits. We have always had more than we could handle. And I laughed about it. A year ago, we had an announcement on our website that we were hiring people who would live in remote places where it's very hot, where they'll be living in either mud huts or concrete buildings. They will not have access to running water or electricity. And I thought, oh, that's a good way to attract people. We had, again, more than enough applicants. And they currently come, are people working in the field from 45 different countries. It's important also to note that at least half of the people come from the host country, because we are really there not to do capacity development, but capacity recognition, to support people as they come forward and use their means of protecting themselves and their communities. And that then if we can help or support that, we will. And so we start with at least half. And in many cases, for example, in Mindanao in the Philippines, all of our people in the field now come from Mindanao, as well as the leadership. It's also interesting, and we didn't think about this at first, that our national staff often will go on to become international protection officers in other areas. And that's been invaluable in terms of translating South to South contributions and also understanding about what it's like to live in a conflict zone on an ongoing basis. So the self-protection is, I think, a big key to recruiting, because we're there not to replace, but we're there to support people as they protect themselves. In terms of training is a way that we support. Our people need to be well trained. So we start out with an intensive training that goes on for about 10 days. It's usually deep in the field someplace, because we want to see if people can do this. And that, so it really becomes a elongated screening. And I should point out, and I'll put in the chat box later, we do have a manual that's available to anybody. And I'll put the link for that in the chat box in a little bit. Also, in Minneapolis, a year ago right now, the Minneapolis Public Schools voted to discontinue their contract with the Minneapolis Police for armed police in all the high schools. And so their staff was left in the middle of the summer with, what do we do? And so they hired us to do training and to give them mission preparedness training and to work with them afterwards in terms of implementation. We also offer updated training throughout the year, both in person and online. An important part of our work and support is to support people in terms of trauma awareness in themselves and in their colleagues. In this work, sometimes there's a real kind of macho gutted out, will show. And we want the opposite of that. We want someone who's burned out to say, I'm burned out. We want people who need trauma support to get it. And so we do offer psychosocial support services that include confidential psychological support, where our protection officers can call in. They receive directions how to do this, and they can do it either online or via smartphones. And they can do that with no questions asked, and to work with a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist. And they don't have to ask permission of us. And we never know. 2 minutes? Okay. Also, when staff leave, they continue having access to psychosocial support, but it's just for a couple of months. We don't do very well at that. And that's something that I think we need to look at, is how do we connect and support people on an ongoing basis. So in terms of the pay and how that's working right now is that, as Mary already mentioned, that relationships take time, that we build this on relationships. One of our main reasons that we can protect is because we build relationships. We try to build relationships with all combatants, whether they're state or non-state. And that takes time. And so we need people who can be there for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. We have one fellow, Olo Otieno, who is from Kenya, who has been with us for over a dozen years in 4 different sites around the world. He has a tremendous wealth of experience that's invaluable. And I want to end on that Sephora said yesterday, we have to challenge or change the knowledge making system. We right now are learning a lot, and we have to honor that and hold that up to each other. We are doing valuable work. We have to document it, catalog it, and share it with as many people. And so, as some of you know, we've been involved with the good practices process, and I will give you also the link about the reports from the regional workshops that we're doing. And we will be having 2 international gatherings for people doing this work. And you know, there's now well over 50 organizations. I see you, Stephen. Let me finish this sentence. 50 organizations in at least 24 parts of the world who are doing this work. And we need to connect and share and support one another as this grows. So thanks.
That was fantastic. Thank you. And you were slightly over 10 minutes, but just by 15 seconds. So you did beautifully. Our next speaker is Rivera, I believe. Rivera Sun.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to Mary and Mel for those really helpful and very specific comments about how you do this amazing work. I represent Pache Ibene, which is a 30-year-old nonviolence organization that launched a program called Campaign Nonviolence to mainstream nonviolence everywhere that we can, and another project called the Nonviolent Cities Project, which takes the vision of mainstreaming nonviolence to specific regions, such as a nonviolent Cincinnati, a nonviolent Twin Cities, nonviolent Owensboro, and we have a number of groups that participate with us. But what brings me to this call today is that Pache Ibene actually doesn't do any peace team work themselves. We are here representing how an organization can collaborate with peace team groups to promote and advance the important work they're doing. We see the work of peace teams as not only invaluable, but a core piece of the vision that we hold for a culture of active nonviolence. And holding that, we had to make a choice. Either we're going to do this work ourselves, start our own peace teams, train our own people up, get them out there in the field, or we're going to stop competing with other organizations and we're going to collaborate with them. We're going to honor and respect the incredible experiences and longevity of what they've been doing and say what we can do, what we can productively add to this equation is we can throw down the fact that we've been organizing in hundreds of cities all over the country. We have thousands of people who participate, well, actually tens of thousands of people who participate in our annual week of actions. We have a pretty large email list. We have an active online training program where people are always going to our events page to look at what we're offering. And what we decided to do was to uplift the online peace team trainings. I mean, COVID has been actually a blessing in that way, that we've been able to collaborate more easily. So we now post DC peace team trainings, meta peace team trainings on our events page, even though they're not technically our events, right? We share a common purpose and a common goal, and it is a time for our organizations to really actively collaborate. And I want to just lift up the Meta Center for Nonviolence, who has been doing this work for like a decade or more in my experience, which is actually how I learned about peace teams to begin with. And one of the things that they do is they do regular programming on their radio program, on their newsletter, in their blogs. They are very consistent about putting forward the historical and present work of peace teams. So drawing inspiration from that model, we've been really trying to up our game as an organization in how we promote and advance this work. How do we make sure that the tens of thousands of people who work with us know what an international peace team is, a street team is, a school team is, like Mel was mentioning in Minneapolis. We have a nonviolent cities that did a similar thing with a private Ascension Catholic school to get unarmed peace teams in there instead of hiring the Minneapolis police. Neighborhood teams, but also things like teams at the protests that our organizers are organizing, right? And also common and widespread de-escalation skills or active bystander skills. We found that sometimes this is one of the best outreach mechanisms, is to say, we would like you to get your team of nurses trained in this, or you're a flight attendant and you know that right now in COVID people are having these outbursts of aggressions on airplanes in increasing rates. How about you train you and your colleagues in de-escalation, at which point we'll send them over to Mary or Eli McCarthy's teams to actually get those skills from those who know them best. We are increasingly, as an organization, prioritizing these kinds of collaborations because we find that as peace and nonviolence organizations, we tend to be overly territorial, too competitive. We're all divided and conquered. And when we start to collaborate and share resources and uplift each other's work, what I'm seeing is that we're enlivening our mutual work. We're bringing skills to our nonviolent cities and our campaign nonviolence organizers. We're connecting their local efforts to a huge global thing that's happening that people like us may be paying attention to, but most people don't know that there is actually a nonviolent revolution going on all over the world, where we're actually becoming more and more successful at using these skills. So specifically, the things that we do at Pachi Beni, besides listing the events, is regular mentions in our emails. We're also uplifting the stories from the field of people, like I mentioned at Ascension Catholic School, who have already walked a little ways down this journey, celebrating them, making sure our other organizers know what they did and can replicate it. As a coordinator of that, it's not really my job to be the expert in all of these things. And I think that's really important. Sometimes we think we need to be the experts before we can start to put anything in motion. And oftentimes what we need to do is look at our resources and start leveraging them on behalf of other people, right? Other things we can do are making sure we're lifting up the history and the present stories, and making sure that that general education that Mary spoke about is happening consistently, not just once, not just one webinar, but think about what can our organizations do every single month to bring this work into people's attention. We know from advertising information that it actually takes 8 impressions for someone to buy a car, let's say, or buy, a new kind of shampoo. And drawing from that kind of, we don't want to be commercial marketers, but we can draw a little bit of, like, they've done a lot of research on this. So we know people need repeated impressions. I liked what Mary also said about emphasize the individuals can make a difference, right? One of the stories we all love to tell is about Bacha Khan and the Peace Army, right? The 80,000 people doing this work. Well, that's a very large project, right? That's right, I got it, yeah. We also need to make sure that we are uplifting the small things, the small stories of how 2 people de-escalated somebody on a subway, right? So people feel it's approachable. So one of the things that we're doing with Nonviolent Cities, the Nonviolent Cities Project and Peace Team work, and again, this is circling back to that idea that peace team work, street teams, neighborhood teams, community safety teams, they're using a lot of names now, and it's great to use the name that is popular in the local area. We don't have to be attached to the words so much as the work. So one of the things we're doing in the Nonviolent Cities Project is, as I'm having organizer meetings with each of the steering committees, I'm talking to them about what are your local needs? Where do you need this? Where is there a group in your community that could use this kind of work that you're not connected to, right? Could the youth use it on the playground, right? Or the yard by the school? Could the subway transit workers use it as they're doing their job? Where is conflict happening and getting closer and closer to that point of violence? And how can we walk people back? So lastly, just to remember that activists by and large do not necessarily have these skills. So anytime there is activist stirring, we want to try to increase our community capacity every single time. And for that, you're going to want to partner with someone like a Peace and Justice Center, but also a local school, right? We know that young people are increasingly walking out of school and into action. How can we make sure that they have the skills to de-escalate conflict? And then how can we make the connection between individual de-escalations and group efforts to do this? So for many people, the individual might be the hook because it's approachable, but how can we not leave them in that place, which is a bad habit of the US culture in particular, to individualize everything. But how can we help them understand that they can take the next step to doing it as collective work? So I'm just going to stop there, and I just want to thank everyone for inviting me on this panel. Pache Benny is a newcomer to this particular work, and we're really honored to be here. We're really honored to uplift this collaborative approach and to introduce it into the conversation as how a group that doesn't literally train peace teams can still be a part of the ecosystem of making this work flourish.
Very nicely done. And you so far get the award for coming in at under 2 minutes, but 10 minutes. So we will now turn to the last speaker, and then we can move to conversation and question. So Stephen Nyamiche will be our last presenter. And again, you will have 10 minutes, and I will then give you a warning, so to speak, at 2 minutes. Stephen, you're still muted.
Thank you, Stephen, Dr. Gestire. A quick shout out to my brother Michael and my friend Christy that are on the call. Great to see you all. I'm going to dedicate this to my grandfather, Wiley Perrin, who was lynched in 1938. I bring that up because my journey toward peace work was really not a journey. It was something that was waiting on me. And it began with my ancestors being enslaved, and especially with my grandfather being lynched. So this presentation is dedicated to him. Move this out the way. So I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. I am going to talk about how we view peace. And I think we need to use humor. You know, in our work with this conference, we've talked about when spiders unite, they tie up a lion. And the image in front of you is a person who lives in South Africa, and he gives lions foot massages. It's reached a point where the lions will come out and just lay down and wait for him to massage their feet, which I find to be kind of humorous. It's very different from the approach we're taking, but at the same time, we're talking about using our webs to tie up this lion, this violence that perpetrates not only our communities, but our entire world. I just wanted to leave a little bit of humor there about how we might look at it a little bit differently. And here's something else. I was on my way to work the other day, and we were stopped by some geese who were crossing the road. Again, I just thought it was kind of humorous to see what nature is saying to us about the power that we have to promote peace if we just join together like these geese have done in this image. And then finally, we've talked about the courage it takes to do peace work. And so we have this chicken walking by a KFC, and it says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." I just thought it was kind of funny. All right, so back into this whole thing about justice and peace, I want to show you some images, and I want to invite you to participate. You can unmute and just tell me what you see. I'm going to click on this first image here. What do you see there? It's okay to unmute.
A deer.
Two
Okay.
deers.
A big
I
deer.
see a big and a little deer.
A big and a little deer. Okay. How about this next image? What do you see here?
A woman's face between the trees.
Okay. How about this image here? What do you see?
Tiger.
See a tiger.
You see a
In
tiger,
a tree.
and you see a tiger sleeping right here, right?
What above?
And there's this big tiger, right? What about right here? What do you see?
The tiger. A cat.
In a tree with
In a
birds.
It's like a tree and a tiger.
Okay. All right. So why am I showing you those images? I'm showing you those images in the interest of time for two reasons. Number one, I want us to attend to the fact that we see things one way and other people see things another way. And it's in blending those two images and recognizing the dynamics that are happening between people that we move people into the movement toward justice, toward peace. And the other reason that I put these images up is I put this picture of myself from when I had just gone through the training with Meta Peace Team. And I had this revelation that there's a relationship between justice and peace. And I didn't realize that before. And I think most people don't realize that there are two sides of the same coin. In fact, when you hear no justice, no peace, most people mean that, I think most people mean that as if it's a threat. Like if you don't give us justice, then we're not going to give you peace. We're not going to allow you to have peace. And that's not really how it works. You cannot have peace without justice or justice without peace. And I think that's part of, we need to try to get people to see that the images that we have of peace are not really what this is all about. So you think about doves, right? Isn't that one of the images that comes to mind? And then you have peace, people with the peace sign thing. And then you have, with their fingers, and you have the peace sign with the actual peace sign. And we could go into the history of all this stuff. Then you have, all I did was Google peace, and these are the images that came up. Then you have all these things that are happening with people doing stuff with hands to show that they're collaborating and getting along and all that type of stuff. And it's all wonderful stuff. Then you have all this scenery, about these peaceful locations. And then you have these images of balance with these rocks are stacked on top of each other. And you have people writing the word peace in all these friendly ways. And you have people who have learned creative things with the whole concept of peace and peace images to create their own images. And here's the thing that really stands out for me is you have all of these images of people meditating. I mean, I'm even guilty of it. There's a picture of me right here. Here I am in Arizona doing my peace thing, right? But this is really not what peace work is all about. Then you have the images of people marching and all that. I'll get into the recommendations and stuff in a minute, but am I inaccurate in what I presented so far in terms of what you think of when you think about peace? It's okay to unmute.
Yes, you are accurate.
I am accurate, right. So I'm gonna give you some other things to think about along those same lines. And I just want you to do this exercise in your head real quick. Think about the term loaded, right? Is that a powerful term?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And when you think about loaded, first thing that comes to mind for me is a gun, right? But you hear the term loaded in another context. I intentionally did not put pictures of guns on here, because I Googled loaded as well. Now think about two other terms real quick. One is pacifist. What comes to mind when you think of a pacifist?
Some people think passive.
Yeah, and I would even say weakness, right? Now think about this term that we use all the time in this work, unarmed. Is that a position of strength when you think about being unarmed? to me, it sounds like somebody is taking your power away from you. So there's nothing you can do to defend yourself. Okay. So I'm bringing all this up because as we're out doing outreach to try and get people involved, there are all these, and yes, I will call them negative or passive images of peace that we're up against. I had someone tell me that peace is boring. I had someone tell me that peace is not sexy. And so in response to that, and for preparation for this, I Googled who are the coolest people, coolest characters that were ever created. And I got Samuel Jackson, I got Steve McQueen, I got Clint Eastwood, and James Bond. And with some of those images, they had guns, right? Or they were doing something that was at least bordered on violence. And so part of what we're up against is this whole, it's a marketing issue, similar to what Rivera was saying. We have to do some marketing and kind of retelling the story like they talk about in the Meta Center in California. We have to create that new story and get people to understand that doing peace work does take courage. Doing peace work is exciting. And it's not just about organizing marches, but there are strategies that we have to use. So let me get into the recommendations. I know we're real short on time, but so here's what we've done in Roanoke. Because number one is we acknowledge that the winter came in with COVID. The winter came in, and similar to what they did in Michigan yesterday, when the tornadoes came, we took cover. So we haven't been active in Roanoke. And I'm going to suggest that we continue to practice COVID safety, that we develop our messages. Mary talked about that a little bit, using social media, that we make presentations to our local government, which is what Rivera's son has done. They've created these nonviolent cities, and one of their tasks is to make themselves visible at a city council meeting.
You're at 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, let me just say this real quick, Stephen. We have to continue this conversation. So I have all this written out. We have everybody's email addresses. There's a lot of work to be done on the ground in terms of planning and strategizing and all that. I'm gonna just slide down to one thing real quick. I've just started going through training on Kingian nonviolence. There are 6 steps for Kingian nonviolence. We need to do that and engage all of our stakeholders. So sorry I ran over time. A lot to say in a short amount of time.
Good.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Those are really 4 excellent presentations. It opens up lots of food for thought and food for discussion. I think at this point, we're supposed to open it up for questions or comments. And so we have about 10 minutes, as I understand, which is not a lot of time, but luckily the later sessions this afternoon, we can pick up some of these themes again.
Stephen, we can go later than that.
Oh, okay. So we can go a little bit longer than 12 o'clock. Who wants, so there've been some interesting things put into the chat. Who wants to start? Are there people who want to have a burning question or a burning issue they would like to bring up? And if not, I do. So I will just kick off. I am very interested in the discussions, how the discussions moved from how do we pull people into how do we do a better job of expanding the if you will, our knowledge, how many people know about us, to thinking about where are we doing, who's doing what kind of peace work where, to this of rethink what does peace actually mean, which I think is or reimagine for society what peace actually means. I am interested in thinking about, I look at this through the lens of being an instructor at a university, being a professor at a university, and walking into social movement classes and getting to the section where they talk about peace and having about half the class say to me, well, that just simply doesn't work. And at the same time, having had in the last year discussions with administrators about what are we going to do with, what are we going to do about the increasing tension among students themselves as they come back onto campus around COVID, around politics, around, and trying to think about, how do we use some of these themes to move into arenas that moves us beyond sort of the peace studies part of the knowledge building section. So I'm wondering what's out there and what could we build that would start to make discussion of this kind of work the kind of thing that gets taught in classrooms, but also gets practiced in the places where people are learning. So I'd be interested in the thoughts of all of the four presenters on that.
Well, I'll go first, just because I hate avoid, which is a really bad thing. But I think in much the spirit of what all four of us have talked about is people can't become interested or part of something they don't know exists. And so I think part of what we could do outreach wise is even, I had talked about, offer to speak at the Rotary or offer to speak at a faith. Well, have university professors bring us in and, talk about our experiences, talk about the hope that something like, for example, Nonviolent Peace Force, like not only can you do this, but you can get paid to your living while you're doing something that really lives up to your personal and moral spirit. That this is not pie in the sky, and that it can happen at a small, dorm level, and it can happen at an international war zone level, and it's realistic and effective. I think those two things are not something that's necessarily brought into the classroom every day. It's certainly not in our books.
Yeah, I can add something from our experience actively promoting nonviolence amidst a culture of violence, which is to start there, start with what people know. People do know violence very well. They know both the James Bond with the gun imagery, and they know the heartbreak of losing someone to violence or the internal scarring of having perpetrated violence. It's something that is very common in US society at this point. So when we're training people in nonviolence, we actually start with what is violence, and we start talking about systemic and structural. And the same thing goes for, the work with peace teams or community teams or street teams, is that we're often taught that only more violence is the answer to the problem of violence. And so if we can start talking about the work we do as a viable, realistic, practical, pragmatic, effective alternative, then we start to, the audience is already there. It's just learning how to talk to them about what they're hungry for.
I think, first of all, we're the answer to what you can do with a peace studies major. Secondly, it's important that we create dissonance, that the dominant theme is actually untrue, and that violence is what pervades and has moved history, when in fact, nonviolence is not the exception. It's the typical way in which we lead and which we live. I lived in New York for a number of years, and I would have never gotten to work on the subway if we hadn't all been basically nonviolent. And to really present that dissonance along that the narrative is violence and that nonviolence is the exception. It's actually the other way around. I think also working and supporting people in self-protection. There's a lot of people right now in this country who are under threat. And so, for example, we are working with the American, Asian, and Pacific Islander Association with self-protection workshops. And there's a lot of interest there. And so I think, focusing on the people who, first of all, have a stake in this and are interested and are looking for ways and then building out from there.
I'm particularly struck by the idea of a peace army. And I appreciate the history that's been shared over the course of this weekend about peace armies. I mean, I'm relatively new to this, I didn't start formally getting into this work until 2017. And I'm struck by that idea. And particularly when I think about meeting somebody like Charles Alphen and actually forming a somewhat personal relationship with him and having him coach me on Kingian nonviolence and then starting to go through that training. I really think we need to seriously think about what does that look like? What in 2021, 2022, what does it look like to actually have a peace army with that level of training and to demand from the society that level of energy, money, resources, so on and so forth, be put into promoting peace? That's radical. And that's what this conference is about. This is why I spent hundreds of hours reaching out to people, and I didn't get the return I wanted. I emailed Mary and Melody and said, I feel like I'm planting seeds in the parking lot. But the struggle continues, and I think we really need to take that concept on.
There's cracks in that lot.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what we need to do. What does that training look like? What does that structure look like? What do those relationships look like? What do those protests and those policies and those elected officials look like? Because that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, Peter.
After Gandhi, I have the sense that this concept of Shanti Sena did spread among some folks in the world, and I think with the vision of a real army. The concept, the vision, I think was there, but what group had the finances and resources to create it? Well, we start small. The various groups that form peace teams, we deal with the resources we have, but we can build that concept together of building a peace army. That could be a national peace army, it could be a regional peace army, whatever. So the vision really, I think, is there. When people hear that, like, wow. So we need to build on that image.
Here, can I add one thing? Actually, a woman from the United Kingdom by the name of Maud Royden had the idea of the peace army. I think Gandhi actually took it from her. And they knew each other. She was organizing in the late 20s and early 30s about a group to intervene in the war between China and Japan, and had really developed. She wasn't to the point where she could field a team. She tried to, but so this concept is occurring and recurring and continues to grow.
I see Eli put something in the chat, and let me just address Eli for just a second. What they're doing in DC with the DC Peace Team and trying to build these ongoing relationships in the community, amazing. Definitely one of the strategies that needs to be used with the Peace Army. But he put something in the chat about the Summer Institute. Do you have a link for that, Eli, that you can put in?
So, and while Eli's doing that, we have a couple other interventions that I think are interesting to discuss. Susie Garrett asks about fundraising for payroll. The reality of doing any kind of work like this is we need resources to pay for it. All of you all have experience in trying to make organizations work. Could you talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how do you raise money to do not the human part of this work, which is the hardest part to raise money for on the one hand, and on the other hand, that which makes especially this kind of work most effective? None of you have anything to add on that?
All right, you know me and the vacuum, I hate it. I would just say that for us, it has literally been, as individuals learn who we are and what we do, it can come with a $10 donation, a $25 donation, a $30 donation. And the more people that hear, the more $20, $25, $30 donations we get. And it's allowed us gradually to creep up to 3 paid staff and 3 volunteer staff. And it's nowhere near the scale of what Nonviolent Peace Force is able to do. But it's a true blessing in that two-sided coin kind of thing. That I never for a minute take for granted what a blessing it is to be able to do what is my passion and get paid for it. And I think that is a blessing a lot more people deserve to have. So I think the fundraising is key, because there's people whose hearts are here, but they can't do it because they can't afford to do it.
I think we just heard the pitch from Mary that, we have core fundraising that comes primarily from individuals. And that is really much like our work in the field. It depends upon relationships and persistent connection over the good times and the bad. I've had to call donors at certain points in our history and say, we run out of money next month, and other times, when we can celebrate together. But it is that persistent relationship and inviting, again, people to be a part of this and to see that what they're doing does make a difference and does make a change. Most of our field work is funded by either individual governments or multilaterals. And that, again, is based upon relationships. Our largest donor, I think, is the Dutch government over the years, but also the European Union has been somewhat generous. Different UN agencies, the High Commission on Refugees and UNICEF. Also, we've received funding from Norway, Germany, the UK, France, Australia, Canada, the US. And so, and there's downsides to this too. It does give us the money to be able to employ people long-term and to provide them with necessary support. But it also, there are limits to what governments will fund. And so finding out how we fit into those limits and then expand on it in a way that doesn't dictate our work is at times a challenge.
I would just add, from our little vantage point at Pachi Bene, to not undervalue the role of collaboration. By the end of this year, we will have done an in-kind contribution or barter system with Meta Peace Team and DC Peace Team that probably adds up to thousands of dollars in terms of, promoting their work, talking about their work, putting staff time and getting some of this in. And so we often, get caught in the trap of thinking about only literal dollars versus thinking about how can collaboration actually amplify and maximize the sometimes limited resources that we all have.
Part of the reason that I talked about how we think about peace is because that thinking needs to change. That the paradigm of violence being popular needs to go away. And along with that thinking is the change in government, that we're not looking to, okay, so Charles Alphen was here yesterday and he talked about different types of conflict. And he talked about distributive conflict, like there's this perception that there's not enough resources to go around. Well, I mean, the United States government has spent $28 million on a drone, right? Okay, what if that energy, that creativity, that intelligence went to training people about peace and teaching people about conflict? If we shift that thinking, that energy, then it changes. So we don't have the Mel Duncans of the world saying, "Hey, we're about to run out of money." That statement should never be made. A peace organization about to run out of money? Are you kidding me? I mean, it just tells me how twisted our thinking is in terms of our priorities. So what I'm suggesting is that the complete shift be made so that there's plenty of resources for the Mary Hannahs of the world and the Melody Arndts of the world, and for that matter, the Stephen Yamiches of the world, to do what they're really passionate about. I mean, this thing about peace and justice was not only my calling, but when I was I've been denying it and running from it, and it's been stalking me, until I turned around and said, "Hey, okay, all right, I get it. I'm supposed to do this. Okay." And it shouldn't be like that. And it's because I had a negative view of what peace was all about. But now I understand it's not negative. It's not passive. It's not weak. But I had to have the Marys and the Peters and the Charles Alphens and the Elliot Adamses of the world keep saying to me, hey, Stephen, you need to do this." So we need to do that same approach with our neighbors, our friends, our family members, our government, our politicians, so on and so forth. I hope that makes sense.
Makes a great deal of sense. So I want to call out a couple of things that have been appearing in the chat. And then I'm actually going to do that, but then I have to jump. I'm actually on the board of our local food co-op, which we're trying to will back into life. And we have an emergency meeting at 12:15, so I'm going to jump off. But I did want to just note that there have been some very interesting comments recently from Paul Hubers, and then Lori Michael, and then Sherry Morin had a very specific request. So I wonder if we could have each of them present in order. So Paul first.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sort of isolated as it were under COVID, and also a long-term leukemic bone marrow survivor, which is why I know some of the things I know. And perhaps the first PhD graduate a long time ago through Washington, D.C. to create peace and conflict resolution studies there. So a lot of exposure to curricula at that level. You've got my email and LinkedIn sites if you would like to connect. I realize this is a slow process in dealing with what is real, so to speak, real change through nonviolence and justice. Thank you.
Stephen, you're muted.
Yeah, and so I think Lori Michael had an intervention that I'd like to hear a little bit more about.
Thank you. This is just something I wanted to share, take the opportunity to share with this wonderful group. This year, my graduating class in college, we had our 35th reunion, but due to COVID, we could not gather together. One of my classmates had an idea that if people would have normally spent funds on traveling and hotels, that instead we could redirect those funds this year and create some kind of a class social justice project. It was originally designed, I think, mainly around Black Lives Matter. But since committees formed and people have been meeting, there are other situations that are also being addressed, our best attempt at figuring out. And one of the interesting things about that is that there are activists among the folks organizing, but there are also a lot of folks that don't have really any experience with or much experience with activism or aren't very connected with the peace community. So I've kind of had the idea of wanting to help people connect more. In fact, I had told them about this event, but basically the idea I had was that if my class got together and did this year, why only do it during COVID years and why only our class? Because if we think of all the colleges and all the reunion years, that's a lot of opportunities. And I was thinking also that college alumni associations and reunions often have talks for people to go and listen to an interesting lecture on something. This could be the something. And that also there could be a suggestion of college alumni that all live in the same city or town could form one of these groups to do this kind of work in the communities. And it would be an opportunity to reconnect with classmates and just sort of an organizing point to draw people to make a difference. And also that people that many times college alums are searching for some kind of a meaningful project or something to do, especially retired folks that have passed a certain point where they're no longer working. So that was the idea.
Thanks, Lori. Behind the scenes, Stephen passed the baton to me. He said, all right, it's your turn to herd the cats. And we have our chat has lit up, Rivera, with requests to have you speak about the nonviolence news. And so I want to invite you to do that and ask one of my colleagues to put up another link to join the Shanti Sena Network, because I've found the session so inspiring and so many good ideas are being shared in the chat and what we've heard. And being part of the network is a great opportunity to be able to continue to connect and share these things. But Rivera, I'm going to ask you to promote our nonviolence news here because it's a great resource.
Great. Well, to tie it into peace teamwork specifically, multiple times, both Mary and Stephen and Mel have spoken about, and I even spoke about how there's this thing afoot. Nonviolence is not only the normal for humanity, it's actually on like an upsurge of use and effectiveness. And so about 2 years ago, with the MK Gandhi Institute in Rochester, New York, they ran a program called Nonviolence Now, and we spun it off into something called Nonviolence News, where I go out every week looking for 30 to 50 stories of nonviolence in action all over the world. And I thought it would be hard to scrape together 30, but actually it's hard to limit it to 50 stories. These are things of people taking action, using strikes and boycotts. There are also people de-escalating. One of the great stories I found was two kids grabbing a man who's about to jump off a bridge and hugging him around the waist until help arrived. And so I do follow the stories of the peace team. I run the newsletters from Nonviolent Peace Force. It's really helpful when you have it in a blog post format. It's a slight plug, because I just collect the links and I send people to what's going on. So it's a great way to illuminate how powerful we are when we see what it is that we're doing. So if you're thinking about those narratives that Mary spoke about getting people involved, telling the stories is really important. And so Nonviolence News tries to pick up your stories and circulate them more. We have about 81,000 people, 90,000 people on our email list right now. So we can get it out there. Thank you.
And would you be willing to share in the chat, if people aren't seeing that news, how they could find it and maybe how they could, give you the heads up for their critical links?
Absolutely.
As well as how they can get on your email list. There are a couple of people. Madeline McKay, are you on the call? She sends out wonderful emails. Eli again sends out wonderful emails. So yeah.
And so,
oh, excuse me, Stone. Can I ask Stephen a question? That did you say that one drone is 28 million?
Yes.
And so 28 million, that same amount, would field 560 well-trained, paid, unarmed civilian protectors. 560. So we're the fiscal conservatives in this equation.
Yeah. Well, take a look at the whole the United States government. If they just took a percentage of the money that's spent on military. I mean, my daughter's always talking to me about her college debt. I mean, it could be wiped out in the stroke of a pen, So the drone was just one little example.
Fantastic. I want to be respectful of folks' need to get off screen for a little bit before our next presentation and get a bit of a break. But to encourage you to come back for asserting our humanity, a spirituality of nonviolence. I have to move my chat here. Coming up with Johnny Zokovich, and that's going to start at 1:30 Eastern time, which is 12:30 Central, 11:30 Mountain, and 10:30 out where I am on the West Coast. And so that's coming up. And of course, we want to continue these conversations and make sure you've made a note of the resources in the chat. If you're not aware, in the chat box where it says to everybody, there's also a box with 3 dots. And if you click those 3 dots, you'll see the option to save the chat. My advice is when it offers to show you where they put the chat in your Finder, take that opportunity. And you can get a little transcript of our chat if you haven't had a chance to save some of those links and ideas for yourself as well. And I want to thank our panelists today. This was such a wealth of information. Thank you so much. And we very much appreciate all of you, both our panelists and everyone who joined us. And this was a great participatory session. And I really appreciated everything that everyone shared. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you at the next session. And I'm about ready to hit end all. So have a wonderful time, wonderful break before we see you next.
Yay, thank you.